Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to English debate. After we had the holiday, Eid al-Fitr holiday, first of all, I have to say that Happy Eid al-Fitr. Mohon maaf lahir batin. Okay, today we're going to talk about refutations after we had building cases, especially for the proposition teams. Now we go to refutations, how to refute, how to rebut, or how to talks against or make arguments to rebut the argument from the oppositions. Okay, now first, what is refutation or what is rebuttals? Refutations or rebuttal is when you show that your argument is stronger than your opponent's, or that your opponent's argument is weaker than yours. So the points of refutation is how to show that your argument is superior. Yeah? That is the points to win the debate, to make sure or to convince the judges that your arguments with the evidence, with the proof is stronger than your opponents. So you need to offer the evidence, countering evidence, the evidence that will crush your opponent's arguments, the evidence that will negate, that will make your opponent's arguments seems weaker. Next, you need to blur the link between its evidence and its arguments. So in the refutation, you need to make your opponent's arguments weaker by blurring the link between the evidence and the argument. You can say that your arguments is not related to the evidence, or your evidence is totally inconsistent with your argument, for example, like that. We will discuss it later. Next, when you want to show that your argument is stronger, you can rip apart the argument's reasonings. It means that you can look down, or you can give counter argument that is stronger, and it will break your opponent's arguments apart. It will destroy the arguments of your opponents. So next, the step of refutation. The first is repeat the arguments you are going to refute. Okay, so you need to repeat the point from your opponent first. Yeah, what is the points of your opponents? After that, you refute the arguments by explaining what is wrong with the other team's argument. In this step, you need to find the lack or the weaker part of your opponent's arguments. Next, the last is replace. After you succeed in showing the weak points of your opponent's team's arguments, it's time for you to replace with your arguments. Yeah? Again, to show that your argument is stronger than the argument. After you succeed in point out the weak points of your opponent's argument. So next, we go to the techniques of refutation. So in the repeat phase, in the repeat step, you use signposting. Signposting is like the words like firstly, second, etc., etc. This is to show the points of your opponents. Yeah, you need to repeat the points of arguments or the evidence from your opponents. Okay, by using the signposting. And then the second, in the refute phase, in the refute step, it's time for you to clash in the refute phases here by explaining why the opponent's argument is incorrect. Or you can employ the direct refutation in the refute step here. Next, in the last step is replace. In this step, you can do linking all of the weaker point of your opponent's arguments, link it to your arguments. Okay, you can make it in forms of groups or by grouping your arguments, or you can don't forget to include the impact. The impact here, after you give the stronger arguments, explains that your opponent's points of view or your opponent's argument is totally weak or totally invalid. Okay, now we go to the example. Example of the motion is COVID-19 is deadly virus. Okay, so after the prepositions delivering the speech saying that COVID-19 is deadly virus, and then they mention some statistical data about the number of the death patients. Yeah, now it's time for you to refute. Suppose you are the opposition, you make a refutation from the propositional arguments like this. So the proposition team has stated number of inaccurate detail. Okay, you can see in the first sentence here, you point out the weaker points of the argument of your opponent. So the proposition team has stated number of inaccurate detail. Firstly, here you use signposting. First, the first proposition's speaker stated that COVID-19 is deadly and give out statistic of mortality data cases by the COVID-19 infection. Here you point out what is the weaker part. However, they did not mention the source of the information. Okay, this is the weaker part. For example, your opponent didn't give you the source or for example, from which website or from which book or from which journal, etc. However, they did not mention the source of information. In fact, our research show that here, go to your arguments, okay, by showing that your evidence is stronger because you mentions the source. Okay, in fact, our research shows that COVID-19 is not as deadly as they imagined. Research from Universitas Indonesia has found that the mortality rate of COVID-19 is only around 2 till 3%. It is far less than Ebola, which according to WHO reached 50% of mortality rates. Okay, so by giving these kinds of argument, giving these kinds of evidence, you make your opponent's argument and evidence weaker. Yeah, because you can strike at the weaker points of your opponent. That is the first, the source of information that is blur, yeah, invalid. And the second, you can compare in scientific way that COVID-19 is only 2 or 5% and Ebola is 50%. Okay, and after that you can go giving more evidence, for examples by example from the other pandemic, such as the black pandemic or the for example the TBC, tuberculosis, etc. That is stronger, or that is more severe, yeah, more severe than COVID-19. Okay, I think next we go to the tips what you need to give attention to. First, Prepare your refutation. How to prepare your refutations? You need to predict the opposite team arguments. Okay. So although you haven't heard about your opponent's argument, you need to predict first. Yeah? Make a prediction. Oh, my opponent arguments will be like this, like this, like this, and then after that, you make the counter arguments and give the counter evidence to refute them. And then the second, you need to make your refutation meaningful. How? By always linking to your argument. After you find the weaker point or weaker spot of your opponent's arguments, yeah, link that to your argument to show that your argument is stronger. And then the third, work as a team when writing refutation. You need to work in a team. Yeah? In writing the refutation here, you cannot do it alone. Okay, so maybe in the first time you make the argument and evidence alone, but after that use the or spend the times together with your teams and then discuss it. Okay, so it is the team decisions, not only the individual decision. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you very much. After this, as usual, you try to have an exercise. I will